We're in the midst of our annual Exploring Monastic Life program, and we've been sharing a little bit about our experience of monastic life here at Sravasti Abbey. So I thought to talk a little bit about how my practice has changed over the years. Um, First of all, let me just say that the change that I've seen internally is much quicker than what I ever experienced in householder's life. That's not to say I'm, very far along the path at all, of course, but uh, in householder's life, I would try to make changes, but I didn't see a whole lot of progress like I experience here. And I think that's just the power of community. It's quite wonderful. So there's some very deep habitual patterns of thinking that I have to dismantle pretty regularly. So the first one is that I have to remind myself that happiness uh, comes from here, not anything outside of myself. That sounds so simple, and I forget it so often. So I have to remind myself of that one a lot. Um, so I think the first focus of my practice when I first came here was to really get to know my mind. I had learned some Dharma and had done some retreats and such, but really I didn't really know how to apply it to my mind. And so that took some time. And again, it has to do with this idea of looking inward and working here instead of looking outward and blaming and, paying attention to other people's practice. I also came here with a lot of unrealistic expectations that I wasn't even aware of, but when they didn't come through, then I responded with a very afflicted, reactive mind quite often. And so then the next part of the practice really started being to figure out what kind of antidotes would work with my mind. Because there's a lot of antidotes, but I would apply one and it's like, okay, nothing, not much happened. And so I really had to work with and really trial and error and see what was going to work. And so that took some time also. And then as I started getting calmer in my mind over some years, then I started recognizing that I had a lot of negative self-talk and self-criticism in my mind. And so then it was to work with that. And the first thing I did with that was try to beat it out of my head. And that was not pleasant. And it didn't work. So then that led me to uh, figuring out how to relate to myself with some compassion, because that's the only thing that really turned that self-critical chatter in the mind. And like I talked about a little bit yesterday, it really was kind of like this low-level music in the back of my mind, running quite frequently. So I really had to pay attention to capture what it was saying and then uh, not trying to force it out or get away from it. That didn't work. But to first accept it. I was conditioned in this way, probably brought it from past lives. And then after accepting it, then to start moving it with some compassion. And then that was a whole nother layer of working with how can I talk to myself that it's going to move these negative thoughts that are really stuck in there and deeply embedded, I would think, because I probably have been doing that for, years and years and years. And so it really was about internal acceptance, compassion, and figuring out how to support myself with my practice, and that also then got me to look at how I had the expectation that others would either change or help so that I would have ease here. And that doesn't work either. That's a dead end road. Yeah. And so the last thing that I've noticed is that there's quite an ebb and flow to my practice. So I'll hit a rough patch and work with that. And then when I come out of that, there is a little more clarity. And that's happened over and over again. And so now when I hit a rough patch, I don't go like, oh no, not this again. Instead, it's like, oh, come on in, because I know at the other side of that, there's going to be some clarity and some movement and some understanding. So I just accept this ebb and flow that comes. Try to anyhow, with some acceptance and kindness, and what can I learn from it. And then I guess the last thing is all of this practice really works only if I pay attention and care about kind of how I'm doing, physically, that I know when I need to stop. I don't take on such a big chunk. I work with my mind not to make myself miserable because I'm behind in work, because there really isn't anything done here. It changes what we do, but it's not done. And so I've really worked this year especially to let that go. There's no end place to this. Maybe when I die for a little bit and then next life, but really there's no end place to this. And that's really helped my mind a lot, because that, looking for the conclusion of something and the end of something, and that's kind of misery making for my mind. So those are just some thoughts that I have worked with over the years, being in this really beautiful community. The kindness here is beyond measure. I can't tell you. So I feel very fortunate.